know, they say you can tell a whole life story just by looking at a man's hands, and if you looked at Lucas Thorne's hands that night, you wouldn't see the concert pianist he used to be, you'd just see raw, red knuckles wrapped in fingerless wool gloves, hovering over the yellowed keys of an upright piano that had seen way better days, probably back when it was sitting in a warm parlor instead of freezing on a street corner in downtown Chicago. It was one of those bitter, biting nights right before Christmas where the wind whips off the lake and cuts right through your jacket, the kind of cold that makes your bones ache. But Lucas wasn't thinking about the cold. He was thinking about the coffee sitting on top of the piano, hoping it would fill up enough to buy a decent meal for the little girl sitting on a crate next to him. That was Maya, his daughter, 7 years old and wrapped in so many layers she looked like a little walking marshmallow, humming along to the melody he was playing, completely unbothered by the fact that they were invisible to 90% of the people rushing by with their shopping bags and their laddies. See, Lucas wasn't out there because he loved the fresh air. He was out there because life has a funny way of kicking you when you're down. And after his wife Sarah passed away 3 years ago, leaving him with a mountain of medical debt and a hole in his heart the size of the Grand Canyon, this was what survival looked like. Construction shifts during the day, playing the only thing he had left of his old life at night, trying to keep a roof over Maya's head. He was playing something melancholic, a slow jazz improvisation of a carol, letting the notes drift up into the snow-filled sky, when he felt a shift in the air, not the wind, but a presence, like someone was listening, really listening. He looked up, past the blurry stream of commuters, and saw her. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, a tiny thing with matted blonde hair tucked under a dirty oversized beanie, standing by the mesmerizing glow of a department store window but looking straight at him. She was shivering, violently, her thin denim jacket offering absolutely zero protection against the Chicago winter, and her eyes, man, those eyes, they were hollow, looking like she'd seen a lifetime of trouble in less than a decade. Most people walked by street kids like they were traffic cones, obstacles to navigate around, but Lucas stopped playing, the silence hitting the street corner louder than a cymbal crash. He didn't say a word, just nodded his head toward the space on the bench next to him, a silent invitation that said, "I see you," and hesitantly, like a stray cat expecting a kick, she shuffled forward. Maya, being the absolute angel she was, didn't even blink. She just shimmied over to make room, pulling a spare blanket from their bag and draping it over the stranger's shoulders without missing a beat of her humming. Lucas started playing again, simpler this time, finding a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat, and then he did something he hadn't done in years. He took the girl's frozen hand, which felt like holding a block of ice, and placed it on the keys next to his. She flinched at first, terrifyingly conditioned to expect pain, but when Lucas pressed her index finger down on a middle C, letting the note ring out, her face changed, the fear cracking just enough to let a little bit of wonder shine through. He guided her through a simple scale, just 3 notes, then 4, and that's when the hair on the back of his neck stood up because she didn't just mimic him, she anticipated him. Her fingers, dirty and bitten down to the quick, moved with a fluidity that you don't teach, a natural grace that screamed muscle memory, like her body remembered something her mind had buried under layers of trauma. Now, while this little miracle was happening under the street lamp, about 30 feet away, hidden in the shadows of a building overhang, stood a woman who looked like she owned the entire city block, wearing a coat that probably cost more than Lucas made in a year. This was Catherine Sterling, the steel magnolia of the tech world, a woman known for eating competitors for breakfast, but tonight she looked like she was about to shatter into a million pieces. She'd been chasing ghosts for 2 years, following tips from private investigators that usually led to dead ends and heartbreak, searching for the daughter who had been snatched from a park in broad daylight, a tragedy that had been splattered across every newspaper in the state before the leads went cold. Her investigator had told her there was a sighting in this district, a girl matching the description, and Catherine had been standing there for an hour, freezing, losing hope, until the crowd parted for a split second and she saw the back of that dirty beanie. She saw the way the girl tilted her head to the left while listening to the piano, a genetic quirk, something Catherine did herself, and her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She started to push forward, desperation overriding her usual icy composure, needing to see the girl's face, needing to know if this was her Emily or just another cruel trick of the universe. But the universe wasn't done messing with them yet, because right as Catherine stepped off the curb, a delivery bike swerved to avoid a taxi, skidding on the black ice and crashing into a rack of metal trash cans, sending a deafening clamor echoing down the street. The noise was like a gunshot in the quiet moment. The homeless girl, Ivy, that's what she called herself, jumped out of her skin, panic flooding her eyes, the music forgotten instantly as survival instinct kicked in. She scrambled off the bench, ducking behind the piano like a hunted animal. By the time Catherine navigated through the commotion and the gathering crowd of onlookers, the space behind the piano was empty, just footprints in the slush leading into the dark alleyway. Catherine stood there, breathless, her gloved hand shaking, staring at the spot where her daughter might have just been, feeling the crushing weight of being 2 minutes too late again. But she wasn't the only one watching. Across the street, leaning against a brick wall, were 3 guys who looked like they were carved out of bad intentions. Marco and his crew, low-level street predators who knew exactly what things were worth. Marco hadn't been watching the music. He'd been watching the glint of silver at the girl's throat when the blanket slipped, a heavy, custom-made locket that didn't look like something you find in a dumpster. He nudged his buddy, flicking a cigarette into the snow, and muttered, "You see that? That's not costume jewelry, that's a payout." And as Lucas packed up his gear, looking frantically for the girl who had vanished, Marco's crew peeled off the wall and started trailing the shadows. Lucas knew the streets, though. He knew the rhythm of danger. Her hands moved to the table surface, fingers drumming out the counter melody, the harmony that goes underneath the main line, perfect pitch, perfect timing. Lucas turned off the stove, his heart pounding, and asked, "Do you know that song?" She looked up, eyes wide, whispering, "Mama used to play it when the storms came." That was the smoking gun, the confirmation that this wasn't just a homeless kid, this was the missing Sterling heiress, the girl whose face had been on milk cartons 3 years ago. Lucas knew he had to act. He had to get her back to her mother, but he also knew the streets were watching. He didn't know that Marco and his crew had tracked them to the building, didn't know they were parked down the block in a rusted-out van, waiting for the rabbit to come out of the hole. Lucas bundled the girls up, telling them they were going on an adventure, intending to walk them straight to the police precinct 6 blocks away, figuring that was the safest play. But the moment they stepped out onto the sidewalk, the atmosphere shifted. It was too quiet. The hairs on Lucas's arms stood up, that combat instinct he hadn't used since his younger, wilder days kicking in. A van screeched around the corner, hopping the curb and blocking their path, the side door sliding open with a menacing rattle. Marco jumped out, flanked by 2 mountains of muscle, holding a crowbar like a baseball bat. "Hand over the kid," Marco sneered, not even bothering to look at Lucas, his eyes locked on Ivy and the silver chain around her neck. "We know who she is, and we know what she's worth." Lucas didn't hesitate. He didn't try to negotiate or plead. He shoved Maya and Ivy behind him and squared up, putting his body between the wolves and the lambs. "You won her." Lucas growled, his voice dropping an octave, sounding nothing like a piano player and everything like a father protecting his pack. "You gotta go through me." Marco laughed, a dry, ugly sound, and swung the crowbar. Lucas took the hit on his forearm, a sickening crack echoing in the cold air, but he didn't go down. He used the momentum to drive his shoulder into Marco's chest, tackling him into the snow. "Run!" he screamed at the girls. "Get to the corner store. Run!" It was chaos, absolute freezing chaos, with the snow turning into grey slush under their boots as the girls scrambled toward the bodega on the corner, their breath puffing out in white clouds of terror. Lucas was on the ground, wrestling with Marco, taking punches to the ribs that felt like sledgehammers, but he held on, buying them time, grit, and adrenaline masking the pain of what was definitely a fractured arm. The other 2 thugs bypassed the fight, sprinting after the girls, their heavy boots thudding against the pavement like the countdown to a bomb. Ivy tripped, of course she tripped, her boots were 3 sizes too big, and one of the guys grabbed her by the back of her coat, hoisting her up like a rag doll while she screamed, a high-pitched sound that cut right through the city noise. Just then, a sleek Blacktown car came tearing down the street, ignoring all traffic laws, swerving around the parked van and screeching to a halt right in the middle of the melee. Catherine Sterling had spent the last 12 hours terrorizing the city's grid management to access traffic cams, and she had tracked the group to this block. She didn't wait for her driver. She kicked the door open and stepped out, not with fear, but with the fury of a mother who has had enough. She saw her daughter dangling in the grip of a street thug and she didn't scream, she pointed. "Let her go," she commanded, her voice amplifying off the brick buildings, carrying the weight of a woman who could buy and sell everyone on this block. The thug hesitated, confused by this sudden arrival of wealth and power in his grimy alleyway, and that split second was all Lucas needed. He kicked Marco in the knee, hearing a satisfying pop, scrambled to his feet, and launched himself at the guy holding Ivy. He wasn't fighting with technique anymore. He was fighting with pure, unadulterated desperation. He tackled the guy into a pile of trash bags, breaking his grip on Ivy. "Get to your mom." Lucas yelled, spitting blood onto the snow. Ivy looked at Catherine, really looked at her, and the recognition was instant, like a light switch flipping in a dark room. "Mama," she choked out. Catherine fell to her knees in the slush, arms wide open, and Ivy ran, colliding with her in a tackle hug that nearly knocked them both over. It was the kind of reunion that makes you believe in God, sobbing and clutching, and 3 years of nightmare finally ending in a single embrace. But the villains in real life don't just stop because the background music swells. Marco was back up, limping but furious, pulling a switchblade now, realizing the kidnapping had gone south and deciding to cut his losses by taking out the witnesses. He lunged at Catherine's exposed back. Lucas saw it coming. He was battered, bleeding, his left arm useless, but he threw himself in the path of the blade. It slashed across his shoulder, cutting through his jacket and biting deep into the muscle, but he managed to grab Marco's wrist with his good hand, twisting it with the strength of a man who hauls concrete for a living. "Stay down." Lucas gritted out, slamming Marco's hand into the pavement until the knife skidded away. Police sirens finally began to wail in the distance, always late, but better than never, and the remaining thugs scattered like roaches when the lights turn on, leaving Marco groaning in the snow and Lucas collapsing against the wheel of the town car, his vision swimming. The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights, paramedics, and police statements. Lucas refused to go to the hospital until he knew the girls were safe, sitting in the back of an ambulance with a blanket around him, watching Catherine Sterling hold her daughter like she was trying to fuse their atoms back together. When the adrenaline finally wore off, the pain hit him like a freight train, and he let the EMTs load him up. He figured that was it, the end of the movie. The rich lady gets her kid back, the poor hero goes to the county hospital, and they never see each other again. That's how the world works, right? 3 weeks later, Lucas was sitting in his tiny apartment, trying to open a can of soup with one hand because his other arm was in a sling, feeling pretty sorry for himself. The medical bills from the stab wound were piling up on the counter next to the ones from his wife, and he was wondering if he'd have to sell the piano. Then there was a knock at the door. Not a landlord knock, but a polite, firm knock. He opened it to find Catherine Sterling standing in his dimly lit hallway, looking out of place in her designer wool coat, holding a garment bag and a sleek black folder. "Mr. Thorne," she said, and her voice wasn't the icy command from the street. It was warm, trembling slightly. "May I come in?" She stepped inside, looking around at the poverty he lived in, not with judgment, but with a profound sadness that he was living like this while saving her world. She sat down at his wobbly kitchen table and slid the folder across. "I looked into your history, Lucas. Juilliard trained, played Carnegie Hall at 24, dropped off the map 4 years ago." She paused, looking him in the eye. "You didn't just save my daughter's life. You saved her soul. She told me about the music. She told me you heard her when no one else did." Lucas shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what any dad would do." "That's just it," Catherine said, leaning forward. "Most wouldn't. Most would have walked by." She opened the folder. It wasn't a check. It was a contract. "I'm opening a new wing at the Sterling Foundation. A conservatory for underprivileged children, kids who have talent but no means. Kids like the ones you were playing for on the street. I want you to run it. Full benefits, a salary that reflects your talent, not your circumstances, and housing included on the campus." Lucas stared at the paper. It was a lifeline. It was a future for Maya. It was dignity. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. Catherine smiled, and for the first time, she looked completely at peace. "Because my daughter hasn't stopped talking about Mr. Lucas and Maya. She wants to play the piano again, but only if you teach her. You're family now, Lucas. Whether you like it or not, you're stuck with us." Cut to 6 months later. We are in a massive, sun-drenched music room that smells like lemon polish and expensive wood. There's a Steinway grand piano in the center, and sitting on the bench are 4 people. Lucas, his arm healed, is playing the bass line. Catherine is sitting next to him, looking softer, happier, playing the melody. And squeezed in between them are Maya and Ivy, who is now clean, healthy, and glowing, improvising a duet on the high notes. It's chaotic, it's loud, it's not perfectly tempoed, but it's the most beautiful sound in the world. They finish the song with a dramatic, crashing chord, and everyone bursts into laughter. Ivy leans her head on Lucas's shoulder, a gesture of total trust, and says, "We sound pretty good for a street band." Lucas looks at Catherine, who is looking back at him with a gratitude that goes beyond words, and then he looks at Maya, who finally has the childhood she deserves. He realizes then that he didn't just save a girl on a street corner. He saved himself. He thought his life was over when his wife died, thought he was just marking time until the clock ran out, but life had surprised him. It had shown him that broken things can be put back together, maybe not exactly how they were before, but into something new, something stronger. So, here's the question I want to leave you with, and I want you to be honest in the comments. We walk past people every single day, people on corners, people in the shadows, people who look like they're past the point of no return. We tell ourselves it's not our problem, or that the system will handle it. But what if the only thing standing between a tragedy and a miracle is you stopping for 5 minutes to listen? If you saw a kid shivering in the cold, would you open your home, knowing the risks, knowing the cost? Or would you keep walking? Let me know what you think, because honestly, the line between Lucas and the rest of us is thinner than we think. Thanks for listening.